Well, can I make an elaboration before we start the QA section?
Sure.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I'm Rick Knosson from Intel Corporation. Yeah. One of the things we struggled with, and I hear some of the other questions struggle with too, is the spectrum between a well-defined problem statement and objective and more of an amorphous research project. And, I work for a technology company. I'm an engineer. So I quickly want to say, what are we trying to do? What data and parameters do we need to capture, and which standards do we need to do those, right? And I've worked a lot with HL7 and Continua Health Alliance, and there are standards in place, and I think we need to do that. We need a crisp subset of what we need to do, along with some standards in place, so we can normalize the data and have some findings. On the other hand, this is something different and new, and we're talking about apps that are going to be interacting with this data and getting back to the participant, right? We at Intel, we have some smartwatches that collect sleep data, and you put that data up in the cloud, and then the users go and look at it and get recommendations back. So this notion of a protocol is something quite a bit different. So I think we need to be open also, in addition to we're doing these discrete items, we need to be open to where can we go with it. And we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what type of data and findings and advice that this is going to lead to. So there's also a lot of database technologies that allow you to do unstructured data mapping, and there's a lot of data coming out that we can use for that too. So I just think we need to have both spectrums in mind, but for sure have some specific things we want to define some standards for normalized data and get something done, but then also be open to really where this can go and throw out the old way of doing things, because this is really revolutionary. We have a lot of technologies that allow for the other.
Thanks. Yep.
Chris Austin from NCATS. Actually, I don't have a question, but I'm sitting next to George, and George had a question. Nobody would call on him anyway. No, just kidding. So the vision is really compelling, but and as maybe it comes from sitting in the back row here, I don't know, but it strikes me that we're going to run headlong into the realities of human behavior. And we're all aware that health junkies will do the kind of thing that you're listing there, but regular people will not. And we all know the statistics of how long people stay at the health club, how long they use their Fitbit. People start with great enthusiasm and they have a half-life of a month and then they drop off. And of course, this will be a huge problem for a project like this. It also runs into the problems of adherence we're all aware of, models of illness. People don't like to be reminded all the time that they're sick, and so that's something we'll have to deal with. So how have you thought about that problem of adherence, really broadly, maintaining enthusiasm over time, getting beyond the health junkies and the data junkies? I mean, everybody in this room will do it, but we're not exactly a representative sample. And should we think about doing what the airlines do? The airlines know, well, there's a certain rate of people not showing up for seats, so we double book. Is that the kind of thing that we should do within a cohort like this?
So I'll take a quick comment on that. Very, very important question, and I think you'll hear tomorrow our recommendations. Tomorrow, our recommendations, is this what we're using? Okay, sorry. Are we on here? Can you hear? Okay, so tomorrow we'll recommend basically this notion of passive, yeah.
I think this one's working.
Okay, this one's working. So sorry. So this notion of making this as lightweight as possible will be important, and we think that will capture most of the folks that we need to capture for a while. But I think one of the important things that I mentioned is this notion of user experience and design. We have to put some emphasis on that. And again, there are some very good people working on that problem right now. So I think this notion of engagement is something that is not an unsolvable problem, especially if we're talking about lightweight devices across the entire cohort. Smaller subsets of the cohort may in fact be able to use more of these devices, and they may be more incented because of this generated feedback that we're talking about that people could get. People need to get something from this in some way, and so I think that's part of this. So that's my comment, is this notion of again, lighter weight devices across the population. Kevin, did you want to comment?
Very short questions, very short answers. A lot of people want to get questions.
Yeah, very quick answer. Central point, we know that even when people have heart attacks, they don't take their medicines half the time. So this is going to be a central issue. I think we're going to have to use all the different behavioral engagement strategies we can to get both a representative cohort and keep them engaged.
Thank you. The white paper and your talk focuses on using these technologies largely to assess exposures. And I wonder whether there could be greater emphasis on the use of these approaches to assess and characterize health outcomes, and indeed kind of changes in health over time, say cognitive decline, those sorts of measures. Because I think they would be, I mean, obviously exposures and outcomes, they blur a bit, but the focus seems to be on exposures, and it would be good to have much more about declining health, or even the development of health outcomes that may not be picked up through record linkage.
That's a great point, and we all wholeheartedly agree with it. We believe that mobile data, especially data on physiology, as well as on the behaviors, as well as on the movement, they all can inform outcomes. So in addition to the outcomes collected from the EHR, as well as collected via self-report, the data collected from mobile devices can directly inform the outcome as well.
Kishal Jaquish, NHLBI. I heard the term Framingham 2.0, and I'd like to share with you some pilot data that a colleague, Caroline Fox, collected at the Framingham Heart Study regarding use and adherence of health techniques. So of the individuals that come into clinic regularly and fill out paper questionnaires, 45% of them responded to a web-based questionnaire. Of those same participants, 32% of them had smartphones. When you looked at those who had smartphones, they were younger, they were more educated, more likely to be employed, and they were a lot healthier. So there was a huge bias there that we're going to have to address.
Peter.
Yeah, so I think we need to orchestrate this project so that this cohort becomes part of their everyday interaction, not just with the health system, not just with the studies, but with their everyday interaction with all of their other health endeavors, whatever they might be. And so you're absolutely right. 80% of the dollars is spent on 5% of the people, and those 5% of the people are the least participatory. And that's a problem that we think the passive methodologies we're talking about are particularly attuned to picking up. There are really a huge range of passive things that with precision, with big data and analytics, we're going to have a great idea, really get a lot more data out of that. And by tapping both the patient data, especially passive, and their normal interactions with their clinicians and therapists and everybody else, that's a different kind of interaction that we don't normally anticipate.
Mark Williams, Geisinger. I think that what we're really talking about here is something that we encounter in the clinical setting all the time, which is workflow and disruption of workflow. And it seems to me this is a perfect opportunity to synergize with the participant engagement group to say, from a participant perspective, rather than imposing disruptions of your workflow or your daily life, how can we, as you say, integrate it into the daily life? And I think Dan is almost certainly going to be getting into this, but as we engage with providers and other stakeholders, this is a central question that really has to be asked. How can we gather the data with the least disruption of workflow? And second of all, to the point that Pearl made, how can we maximize the value for that particular stakeholder, recognizing that the value proposition is going to vary across the stakeholder community?
Well stated, and thus this emphasis on user-centered design. Again, this really has to be a cornerstone of this. We cannot get ahead of the people that are going to be using these.
And just kind of to elaborate on the last one, I think we have to acknowledge there are going to be subsets. There's only 60% of the U.S. population has smartphones today, and we can't assume that necessarily. But just like there will be a subset of people with particular chronic diseases, there will be a subset of people that have a smartphone and will be able to do more epigenetics and collect different, richer data set.
Jeff Ginsburg. Sorry, Jeff Ginsburg from Duke. I think this is an extraordinary opportunity for us to collect phenotypic data that we never had the opportunity to collect before, but I think Dr. Patrick mentioned the term Wild West in your remarks, and I'm just wondering, where's the epicenter of this field that's actually establishing the standards for data quality, analytic validity, or clinical validity of the devices that we're talking about, so we know we're really getting the rich phenotypic information we aspire to collect?
Well, I can say part of this, the project that Santosh and I are involved in, this mobile data to knowledge, is attempting to sort of provide some insights that might be fed into the community for this. Another project that I'm involved in, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation funded Health Data Exploration Project, is trying to again, work with the community of companies, of researchers in this area to advance methods. There's a lot of methodological work that has to be done. And I'm sort of the cup's half full rather than half empty kind of thing. I think we can do that. Again, there are good folks that are doing research in this area, and I think over the lifetime of this cohort development, we will get better and better and better at some of the things that you're talking about as far as characterizing these, and especially if we can combine different forms of the data that we're talking about to characterize the phenotypes using a combination of social, mobile, and EMR data, for example.
Great. Last question in the back.
Yes, thank you. This is Vic Bajaj from Google Life Sciences. So I don't want to reflexively echo the comments of my colleagues from Regeneron, but it seems to me that you've already decided to accept a tremendous amount of heterogeneity in this federated cohort design. And now with these physiometric sensors and perhaps with each kind of analysis that you want to do, each form of interaction with the patient, you are layering on more and more heterogeneity. And I just wonder if the outer product of all of those heterogeneous dimensions is not going to result in a space that's just so high dimensional that no amount of data analysis will help you. And is there a decided effort to reduce the heterogeneity and standardize to get to one or two well-defined cohorts?
Can I start real quick? I totally agree with you, and that's kind of what I started with. I think we need a few things that we know we're going to do and make sure we have some standards to normalize the data. On the other hand, we have some great techniques to do analytics, natural language processing, structured text reading, and I don't think we know what we don't know yet, so I don't want to close the door on some of those things that we might want to discover later.
Yeah, nobody would have suggested that we try and define what the internet was going to do when we built it, right? This is a platform, and the platform will have uses beyond our comprehension now, and it's incredibly complicated, but it works. That's the plan.